This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin. This week, I am joined by a llama and a peasant falling off a bridge and about to plunge to a crocodile doom unless they can learn to work together. Nick White.
Yes.
Kara Shimborski.
Hey.
Listen, I just, some people write things in the doc, and I just read them verbatim like Ron Burgundy, so this is what's happening. Welcome to the I Read Comic Books podcast. This is episode 264. I'm here to talk to two very fantastic people about comic books and all other things. But before we get into it, I have one quick announcement. If you haven't seen it, if you didn't get a chance, I created this new merch store for the show. It's on Big Cartel. I moved it over to a website, shop.ircbpodcast.com. Our pins were up there. They're currently in transit to a new location so they can be distributed better. But if you want, we have hats. We have sweaters. We've got a new t-shirt in the merch store. If you need to get some IRCB merch, go to shop.ircbpodcast.com. Get one today. The sweater is embroidered. Like, it's a legit, like, you have the IRCB logo thing embroidered in your chest. It's awesome. I can't wait to get mine. So go grab one. But anyways, let's get into this show. Let's talk about comic books. Let me ask the legally mandated question I have to ask every week. How have you been, and how have comic books been? Let's start with you, Kara.
Okay, so I am very much a Christmas person, and I think I might be the only Christmas person who is, like, not totally mad at the reality of 2020 pandemic Christmas, because last Christmas was, like, weirdly emotionally fraught for me. So like, I wish the pandemic wasn't here, but instead of being sad or mad about the reality of not having Christmas be the annual gathering of friends and family, I am choosing to be like, thank God. Like, I really need a reset from other humans. So.
The song just, simply having a wonderful Christmas. It's just going in circles in your head.
Actually, so I bring this up because, nice segue, Mike, the song that has been stuck in my head for this whole past week is Carly Rae Jepsen's new single, It's Not Christmas Till Somebody Cries, which is such a fun song and speaks to me on a deep personal level. I feel like it's the perfect song for this year. It sounds like it should be a depressing song, but actually it's really funny. Like, the lyrics are clever, and it's this, like, upbeat pop earworm that, like, will not get out of my head. And because I literally did cry on Christmas last year and, like, depression napped all day on Boxing Day, I am, like, ready to just fully embrace, like, Christmas will be different this year. I am going to stay home and keep my family and friends safe, but I can still have my tree, and I can still watch all my Christmas movies and bake way too many cookies and eat them all myself and keep listening to It's Not Christmas Till Somebody Cries. Like, it will be okay as long as nobody I know gets sick. So that's kind of, like, my vibe right now.
I see.
This has been a long year for all of us. And, I've started a new job at a different school where I do have to be on the campus. So that is adding a little extra level of fun to everything. But just trying to get through everything with as much health and sanity as possible, which brings me to the comic book I read this week. I read a book that came out a few years ago. It's called The Tea Dragon Society by Katie O'Neill, who's a New Zealand comic artist. And I always have a fond spot in my heart for Kiwis because one of my best friends is from that particular archipelago of islands. So, did not know that fun fact about the author till I finished the book. But this was a lovely short story to just spend some time in. Everything is super low stakes. The art is very, like, a mix between, like, painterly and cutesy, and it's very clearly manga inspired in terms of, like, how characters react with certain, like, facial tic tropes, I guess. Like Senpai Noticed Me situation where, like, the cheeks get all, like, glowy and there's, like, sparkles everywhere, stuff like that, where if you've read certain kinds of manga, a few times, you start to recognize them and you're like, haha, I see your influences. So if we could give the Tea Dragon Society a plot, it would be young girl in slightly fantastical land stumbles upon a tea dragon, returns it to its owner, and decides to learn about tea dragons. Like, everything is super low stakes. It's a very chill book. So a tea dragon is a little dragon the size of like a medium-sized dog or maybe a large cat. And they grow... I'm trying to find references for all our animal lovers out there.
Please.
So they have like either little antlers or like little tufts of fur on their heads, and little tea plants grow out of these. So the dragons are named after different types of tea, and they form these strong bonds with their caretakers. So the reason tea dragon tea is so special and hard to cultivate is because if the dragon like emotionally connects with you, it will begin to store memories of your pleasant times together in its tea. So when you actually brew the tea, you are able to either relive your own memories or share your memories with another person through drinking the tea. So, which is, I thought was very lovely and clever. So like, this book was only like 60 pages long, and it's divided by seasons, like spring, summer, fall, winter.
Okay.
And so and like, if this book had a theme, it would be that craftsmanship takes time and is worth taking that time. So like, the pacing in this book was, like I said, very chill, very relaxing, because it's not like this isn't like a Rocky training montage where within 5 minutes the hero has like total mastery of the thing. This is like, learning how to care for another creature and learning centuries old techniques for creating things. It does take time, and that endeavor is a worthy one. And to get all like philosophical about it, the journey itself is the destination. So it was a really lovely book to read. I think this year in particular, when everyone does kind of feel like they're on some kind of hamster wheel or like stuck in stasis, I think this was a lovely reminder that even if nothing's really going on, you can still slowly make progress in small areas, and those things are worth celebrating also.
Yeah.
So if you are in need of a moment of quietude, and you enjoy whimsical things like the tea dragon concept I have just described, and especially if you're a fan of LGBTQIA plus stories, this is a definite winner. I would consider it all ages. And I learned after I read it, this is actually a trilogy. So there's more that I could read. Also, you can get plushies of the tea dragons, that they're so cute. So
I thought you were about to say this is actually a true story, and I was like, what the hell? I was like, what a twist.
Well, Nick, I'm pretty sure if tea dragons were real, we would have seen it on the news by now.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think Kate also read this, Kate Lamphere, in another week, which I think is like that 2 solid recommendations. So I think everyone should check this out if you haven't already.
It makes sense to me that Kate would also have read this. I feel like she and I align on a lot of like quiet, whimsical stories.
Definitely. Well, Nick, what about you? How have you been? How have comic books been?
I want to thank the two of you. You've definitely given me a couple things to speak to that I wasn't originally planning to. So, I guess that's your fault, I guess. First off, Mike, it's great to hear about all of the merch. That's really exciting. I think we are making baby steps towards the full checklist of YouTube influencer. So I think that's really exciting.
See, the thing is, phase 3 for I Read Comic Books is that I start to offer a subscribe to this private $15 a day podcast, so that you too can also have a successful podcast. We're not there yet, but we're getting there.
Yeah, I mean, it's and I mean, there was a real graphic image when you said that it had the logo and it's embroidered in your chest, and my brain automatically went to some really disturbing like body horror elements
Nick,
with a
no.
IRCB logo in it. But
Merry Christmas. Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays, everyone. And then Kara led in with Last Christmas, and then I thought everything was sort of a scathing rebuke of the song by Wham. So my brain couldn't unhinge from that idea that I was like, I kind of like that song. So anyway, these are the things I thought about, I guess, while everyone else was sharing things. So yeah, things have been okay, I guess. Who really knows what's going on these days? So it's really good to sort of just focus on reading things that are real solid escapism, which is why I read the entire trade of Alien, the original screenplay, because why not read something about a silent killer that roams a small claustrophobic space that you're not allowed to leave out of the fear of being attacked, and why not?
I don't like it,
Nick. And you're nowhere near safety and won't be for years. So I really went out on a limb and just tried to expand my horizons. So yeah. So this is written by Dan O'Bannon. The original screenplay was. Cristiano Seixas wrote the script. I hadn't heard of Seixas before, but apparently he's the co-founder of the, why not, Nick? Let's just butcher all sorts of names here. The co-founder of the Casa dos Quadrinos School of Visual Arts in Brazil. The artist is, oh my goodness, Guilherme Balbi. Sorry, everyone. Balbi drew the pencils on the comic book prequel of Predators, so I suppose that's fitting. Candice Hahn did the colors. This book was kind of a surprise because I originally had the 5th issue selected as my pick of the week. But then when I finished issue 4, Comixology went, oh, do you want to read issue 5? And I'm like, well, I would, but it's not out for a week. And then it was like, no, it came out last week. So just a little tip for everybody out there. If you're relying on like comic book release dates, double check all of them, because I think thanks to this year, a lot of people are working with old/bad data. So just an idea. So I just went and got the 5th one. Some people might remember that Dark Horse from late 2018 to late 2019, they put out a miniseries titled Alien 3, the unproduced screenplay, which was based on the script by William Gibson, who wrote Neuromancer. It was a big deal. And Johnny Christmas scripted and drew that as a comic. And it was a real solid departure from the 1992 film. For better and for worse, to be sure. It was definitely not something I would liken to something I would see as a David Fincher sort of movie. So that said, I think this is a real... People who liked the Alien 3 book might not really enjoy this. Like, the Alien 3 was a real departure. This book is prefaced with this statement, which I found kind of interesting. It says, this is an adaptation of Dan O'Bannon's original 1976 screenplay. I think Alien would come out 3 years later, 79. It's originally titled Star Beast. The visuals and design of the ships and the alien are based on descriptions in the screenplay, which was written before the involvement of H.R. Giger, Mobius, or Ron Cobb. Giger, of course, as some people know, I was going to say most, that's not fair, basically designed the alien, the super iconic alien. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. I felt like the book was sort of like apologizing in advance, like, hey, this was written before all the big famous people got involved, so it might not, it might not really be like the alien you love and know. And so I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. And then I read the book and I'm like, it feels like the original script was mostly spot on. And not to be super cynical, I know I'm regularly pretty cynical, but when you look at the alien design, right, and when you look at some of the other designs in this book, it's like, can you really unlearn what you already know? Right? Like, these people all knew what the alien looked like, and you can, like, try as a thought exercise to unthink that. or otherwise you could like try to induce memory loss via blunt force trauma. I guess you could, I guess, relearn it again if you. I'm not advocating for like re-experiencing memories through blunt force trauma. I'm just saying that it's a possibility, I think. Anyway, like super skeptical about this because the alien still really looks like the alien. So I don't know if Dan O'Bannon's script was that good. But yeah. So people who are looking for a real departure with this book, it's not a real departure at all. If you wanted the silver lining, I guess you would say Dan O'Bannon's original script was pretty solid and nothing really had to happen with it. There's one major twist from the film that goes completely omitted from the screenplay. That's probably about as M. Night Shyamalan as it gets. There's one major twist missing, but beyond that,
you're not spoiling it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. But beyond that, I mean, it's a pretty, color by number sort of thing. They figured out a formula a year or two ago. They're just going to do it again. And you can't blame Dark Horse, much like with Star Wars back in 2014, 2015. Marvel is knocking at the door and threatening to grab all of its toys and go home and not share them. So you can't blame Dark Horse for not really trying to do anything overly ambitious because the property is reverting to Marvel within a year. So
kind of building off of that, because don't some companies, I forget if it's Image or IDW, are allowed to print like Marvel archival stuff? Did I make that up? So is Dark Horse able to do like archival Star Wars stuff?
So I think you're definitely right in terms of IDW doing archive. And obviously they've got some sort of deal with Marvel anyway, because they're allowed to do some Star Wars stuff, right? Like Star Wars Adventures, that's technically an IDW series.
Yeah.
So they do have, IDW has an arrangement with Disney, it would appear. Yeah. As for printing, like, so you're asking, like, will Dark Horse be able to print their old Alien stuff, right? I can tell you right now that in terms of the Star Wars situation, Marvel is just repackaging and rebranding and then putting out the Dark Horse stuff as their own. So that's how they're currently handling the situation. I'm just sort of always looking at the Star Wars model as kind of like the guidepost for what I think is going to happen with the Alien franchise.
Right.
So,
and I don't know if we've seen any reprints of like the Conan stuff, or any other licenses that reverted back to Marvel. So I think it's still kind of up in the air as to how they're going to approach things that aren't Star Wars. But I think Nick's right, that we can probably look at the Star Wars model as the basis for how they'll do things. But I'm sure that the licensing is different with Star Wars versus Dark Horse, or I guess, I don't know, Fox is owned by Disney now, so nothing matters anymore. I don't know, never mind me. Anyways, we got to keep moving. I'm just going to jump right in. This past week has been wild. I feel like I've needed to sleep for 5 days, and then I did sleep for a very long time last night, so now I feel great. Just ready to get into the work week where I'm sure all of my energy will be drained yet again. But I did read a ton of comics because we had a mini-sode. It always happens that whenever we do mini-sode weeks, like last week, I end up reading way more comics than I normally would. And it's not like I'm filling up that time that we would normally record with reading comics, but instead I just happen to read a lot. So, I got caught up on Die. I got, I read like up almost 40 chapters of Chainsaw Man on the Shonen Jump app, maybe like 20 or so. But this week, the things I want to talk about, I read Far Sector number 8 and 9. This is N.K. Jemisin with Jamal Campbell on art. This is, if you haven't been reading Far Sector, I highly recommend you stop whatever you're doing, sit down and say, you know what, I don't know anything about Green Lantern. I'm going to read a Green Lantern comic because this is the book for you. I think I've talked about it on the show before. Far Sector was a book that I didn't know that I needed. Paul recommended it to me, and I fell in love with it. And I kept screaming and yelling and telling Kelly, look at how pretty this page is. And she would go, yeah, it is pretty. Or what else? And I was, it's pretty, because I didn't have the words to describe how wonderful this book is. But as this series has gone on, I think N.K. Jemisin has done a fantastic job of exploring the like very direct parallels between police brutality and state authority, and federal authority over the people that live in a society, and a big change / I guess new mystery has revealed itself in the book that I'm really excited to see her wrap up in the next 3 issues. This is a 12-issue maxi series. All I want to say is that if DC keeps delivering series like this in Mr. Miracle and, you know, these short-lived 12-issue series, like, you've got my money every single time. I don't want to read an ongoing. I just want to read little chunks and pieces of stories. That's just me. But Far Sector is perfect. Everyone should be reading it. The other book I want to talk about is Cosplayers. This is a book we read for the Discord book club that we do every other week. So if you're not on the Discord, you should jump on that. Also, shout outs to the people listening live on the Discord as we record this. You guys are fantastic. I picked this book as part of the book club. This is by Dash Shaw, and it's a collection of mini stories that to me feels like Ghost World done in a modern era. It's got a lot of commentary. The main characters are kind of flat in personality, but that's there in order for you to kind of put yourself in their place, in my opinion. It follows these 2 women who are, one's a photographer, one's a cosplayer, and they take a gap year between high school and college in order to meet up and make YouTube videos. But also this series kind of explores the idea of going to comic book conventions, dealing with the people, particularly the men at comic book conventions, and just the issues that arise in like the mid to like early 2000 or 2010s. This book came out in 2017, or 2014, so it kind of focuses on that era of like YouTube and comic conventions. Yeah, I really love this book. A lot of people in the Discord did not like this book, so like fingers up for you guys. But I feel like Shaw really nailed that feeling of going to conventions in that time. The kind of people that you would see, especially at small conventions, the conversations you would have with people who are just kind of awkward, but everybody's kind of awkward at cons when you're like, hey, I really like, you know, Bleach. Let's talk about Bleach. And you're like, we both really like Bleach. And then you realize there's nothing else to talk about. So you kind of just like fill in time with weird things that come to your head. But nonetheless, I think the thing that we came to the conclusion of was that we all miss comic conventions like a lot. We all miss that chaotic everything that makes you feel uncomfortable, but also very excited at the same time. It can be super draining, but it also can be really invigorating. And yeah, I really like this book. I picked it up a long time ago and just never read it. And actually sitting down to read it and talk about it with people, I was like, this book was fantastic. And everyone else just was like, Mike, this book was dumb.
You had a very different takeaway. Like, my takeaway was these 2 protagonists belong in jail.
Yeah, I mean, but here's the problem, though. It's like it's a book based in reality, but there is some like extremism that happens. Like real people have gone
it gets out there.
There are scenes where like they're filming clips for this YouTube series where the cosplayer character, she's going out on dates with people and they're filming it like long distance away, and it's cringe stuff that you would expect from YouTube at the time. So I didn't feel like it was that much of a stretch. Like there are people on YouTube doing much more heinous shit today than what was portrayed in this comic book. So I didn't really feel like it was that far of a stretch or that strange for these characters to be doing it, because guess what? This is fiction.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just me. That's just me.
It was engaging. It really was. If anything else, like it's if nothing else, I think everyone had a reaction to it. It wasn't like anybody finished it and went, "Oh, that was a book," right? Like everybody came away and was like, "These people are going to burn in hell," or you know what I mean? Like, it's not like it didn't incite feelings in people, because it certainly did.
I mean, you don't have to tell stories about people doing good or being good or learning from their mistakes, because to me, like, this is a Fantagraphics book, and I think we talked about it in the book club that, you know, Fantagraphics is in this weird position where they can tell stories about like asshole-ish characters,
people behaving badly,
and people behaving badly. So again, I like this, and it's not perfect, but to me, like, not looking at the characters and looking what the setting was of the story really made me yearn for comic conventions and just that scene again.
They did nail the cringe. The cringe is strong with this one.
The cringe was real. Wow. Anyways, so yeah, I read that as well. If you get a chance, I highly recommend it. It's on Comixology Unlimited, I think, and Hoopla. But yeah, the one last thing I want to talk about before we move into our comic picks is I got to give my One Piece update. So Xander. I am on chapter 990 of One Piece. 997 just dropped on November 29th, so we're very close to chapter 1000. Probably going to read like 3 more chapters this week, maybe 4. But I really want to get into chapter 1000 with like 5 chapters or 3 or 4 chapters or something like that. Just some like on a good pace and a good speed to get caught up to 1000. And then after that, we're going to be picking some other big series to read on the Discord. And I know we talk about the Discord a lot, but we hang out there all the time. So it's like, get on there, folks. But yeah, we're going to read something.
I'm sorry, Mike, go ahead.
We're going to read something big after this. I don't know. It's probably going to be like Demon Slayer or something that's probably like 200 or 300 chapters just as a group, and try to do like some sort of regular cadence of, make sure you read 10 chapters this week or 20 chapters or something. So if you're interested in just catching up on manga, if you've got $2 a month and you want to dive in, Shonen Jump app's where it's at. That's how I've read all of One Piece. It's how I've been reading all my manga. And yeah, so that's my update there. Nick, did you want to jump in with something before we move on?
Oh, yeah. I mean, how long is a chapter again? Like 20 pages?
It depends on the book, anywhere between 14 and 20 pages.
But One Piece is like roughly 20 pages?
One Piece, yeah, it's about 18 to 22 pages a chapter.
So you've read nearly 20,000 pages of One Piece. That's wild. It is
so crazy. This is Mike's dedication to a craft that takes a long time to get through, chipping away from it season by season, day by day.
Yeah, it's just wild.
This is your tea dragon, Mike.
This is my tea dragon. Well, yeah, let's move on. Let's talk about comic books that are coming out very soon. Comic books are dropping on December 9th, 2020. What are you both looking forward to, whether it comes out this week or in the near future? Let's start with you, Kara.
So, 2 things. One, Norse Mythology number 3, Dark Horse by Neil Gaiman and P. Craig Russell. So I sort of without planning it went on a Neil Gaiman kick earlier this year, and I think his version of Norse mythology is just chef's kiss. It's so good. Each chapter is a totally different story from Norse mythology, but the way he tells the stories, like when you reach the end of the book, you realize you have been reading a narrative that all ties together, even though it doesn't feel like it at the time. Like it feels like you're reading little one-shots, but then as you get deeper into it, you realize that this is all connected. So I think he did a really, really good job of it. And it's one of those books where when you're reading it, at least for me, I was like, oh, totally sucked in. When it ended, I had to like kind of look up and blink and be like, where am I? What year is it? So
you got the Rip Van Winkle beard going on. And...
so
I really love that feeling though. So
I've been asleep
I totally
for 70 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So didn't realize it was being made into a comic book. So not having read the first 2 issues, I assume it's going to be kind of like each issue is a different chapter from the book, or at least that's how I would do it if I was in charge of this book. So, but again, like if they're just adapting Gaiman's writing, or if he wrote a new version for the comic, either way, like it will be great. The other pick coming out this week is Red Sonja, The Price of Blood, number 1. By Luke Lieberman and art from Walter Giovanni. Giovanni did the art on the Gail Simone run of Red Sonja, and I remember not hating that art.
Which for Red Sonja books is probably about as high praise as you can probably get.
So Right. I knew one of you was going to say something like, Kara, this feels like a weird pick for you. Isn't Red Sonja the warrior person in the bikini with the boobs that definitely don't fit in the chainmail bikini? And I would say, yes, but sometimes you have to enjoy the scraps that the pulps over at Dynamite throw you. It's not a like the Red Sonja character. So she's at some point either started out or became part of the Conan the Barbarian universe. I don't know that much about it, to be honest. I know enough about it to know that I think she's awesome. But of course, because her costume is chainmetal bikini over boobs that literally would not fit in that bikini or be supported by it in any way. Like, anyway, so like everything about her is she's definitely existing to fill some kind of male fetish about powerful women who are also sexually objectified. But some of her stories are actually pretty cool. So I am always willing to try a new miniseries because not all of them are complete garbage. So,
right. I was just listening to a show the other day, a podcast the other day, and they were talking about Red Sonja and how like there have been some really, really good runs of that series, despite this like origin of this character being this like male gazy kind of like power fantasy thing that exists. So I mean, I totally am on board for that, if at least trying it, right? Because you never know unless you try it.
Right. So this new miniseries, The Price of Blood, it's like looking back at her early days and she's about to be executed and how did she get here? And I'm like, okay. So we know it's going to be like she did something crazy and now the authorities have trapped her and oh no, is she going to survive? But we already know she will because it's a prequel. So I'm like, okay, I am in a place where I am all about predictable tropes. Give me a Hallmark movie where I know that the pretty people are going to end up together and everything is heteronormatively wonderful. Like I'm just in a zone where I need things to be predictable in my media because real life is not that thing right now.
Yeah.
So like, you know, I already know what I'm getting into with this Red Sonja book. So I figure, why not? I will say one of the most hilarious / awful things about Red Sonja is also the thing that is hilarious / awful about Power Girl at DC Comics, in that every few issues, every new miniseries or so, there's always one panel dedicated to explaining why she's dressed the way she is and why it makes sense in the context of that world.
So like, someone has to engage in apologetics eventually regarding the
like Red Sonja's usually is a version of, oh, but it's easier to move if I'm wearing no clothes.
Right. You don't understand. This makes sense. Trust me.
Yeah, you can say that to the Sun Knight, who's just got the, you know, full metal everything and the big huge thing and the, you know, the giant shield, but whatever.
My two favorites for Power Girl, while we're on this subject really quick, there's one which is pretty consistent across a lot of female characters in DC. I feel like I've read this a few times where she's like, well, if they're looking at my boobs, they're not seeing my fist heading towards their face.
Oh my lord.
And then the other one.
Like, who wrote this?
Oh my god, no. Speaking of who wrote it, there was another story, like, I think back in the 90s or early 2000s, where someone was asking Power Girl, like, you know, why is there that hole on your chest in your outfit? And it was some bullshit about how, you know, she wasn't really a Kryptonian, so she can't wear the sigil of the House of L, so she decided to wear nothing
so
instead.
Might as well do this.
All right, we're moving on, Sarah.
It's so stupid.
Well, with that being said, Nick, what is your pick this week?
I don't think mine's gonna be anywhere as exciting as all of this, I'm afraid, but that's fine. So I'm going with the Comic Book History of Animation #1. So what did I say? So this is written by Fred Van Lente. He's done a lot of stuff, but perhaps he's best known, or maybe I'm just biased, for Archer and Armstrong, Incredible Hercules, which I know Mike really likes, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And Ivar Time Walker. And the art is by Ryan Dunleavy, who has largely worked with Fred Van Lente from a lot of his things, including the comic book History of Comics, Action Philosophers, and Dark Reign MODOK, which he did not do with Van Lente, I think. So this is, quote, the team behind IDW's Comic Book History of Comics returns with a brand new series from Aardman to Zoetrope, Disney to Miyazaki, Hanna-Barbera to Pixar, and everything in between. It's the perfect companion piece to CBHOC. I assume that's Comic Book History of Comics. The comic book history of animation focuses on the filmmakers and beloved characters of the past century and a half, and is essential for fans of the medium and toon newbies alike. Totally on board with this, just because I think it's so hard to nail these kind of edutainment comics so that they're both interesting and engaging without just being way too much of an info dump. Like, I feel with way too many of these that I read that I don't enjoy, you can tell the author is just trying to cram too much information in. Right. But I really enjoyed the Comic Book History of Comics. I thought that was just a perfect sort of pairing of being informational and interesting without just going overboard. And thankfully, like, Van Lente has spent so much time in comics that he understands that the the art should, supplement the writing and not just mirror, which I think with a lot of these sort of edutainment kind of like, oh, I'm gonna, fill you in on something. There's a real redundancy between the art and the prose. So
yeah.
So it's just like the live action Beauty and the Beast, where the songs they added in were not actually moving the story forward and were therefore a waste of all of our time.
I mean, I saved that analogy and I was just like, you know what, we'll roll this out if we need to, but took the words right out of my mouth, Kara.
This looks exciting, if only because I've read like 2 issues of Action Philosophers and an issue of the Comic Book History of Comics, and they're good. They're just a lot. They are like pretty like hefty books in terms of just everything they dump information on, but it isn't an info dump. It's just a lot of information to take in regardless. So to see this one of animation, I think, especially given the growth of animation, I think especially in like adult animation, and as well as just like things like Steven Universe and a lot of other things that have really shown people that animation can do a lot of different things compared to what we've seen over the last 30 or 40 years. It'll be really cool to see how Van Lente and stuff approach this, because I think I've seen different like small documentaries about animation and stuff, but to see it turn into a comic book is really exciting because it's a mashing of some of the greatest things in the world, animation and comic books. Come on.
I mean, yeah, I think it's gonna hit on a whole lot of topics, but honestly, if it doesn't and it just becomes a discussion of why like Cars is disturbing in a weird universe, if you really start to think about it, that'd be fine too. If it just turns into that'd be totally okay.
Yeah
Cars is fucked up. Cars is weird, man.
Okay, but now I'm just thinking about how the first Cars movie makes me cry consistently every time. Okay, I don't need these feelings right now, Nick. I didn't ask for them.
Well, we could talk about that more in the break, but before we get to that, I want to just plug my pick for this week, which is S.W.O.R.D #1. This is probably the most obvious pick out there. This is Al Ewing, Valero Skiddy. I don't care what this is. Just let me read it. That's all that it comes down to. S.W.O.R.D, to me, for those of you who don't know, I guess S.W.O.R.D was a creation out of Joss Whedon's Astonishing X-Men, which was like the other side of S.H.I.E.L.D. They patrolled the outside of Earth to make sure that everything was fine, to keep all of the cosmic foes at bay to a certain extent. And it's introduced one of the coolest characters ever, Agent Abigail Brand, and shit gets really, really fun. I trust Al Ewing at this point with anything, not to mention Skiddy's art. This book's going to be fantastic, and I'm so very, very excited to have another Al Ewing book that I can read every month that's going to be just, I'm certain, very, very good, because S.W.O.R.D is a wonderful, wonderful concept, and I can't wait to see how Ewing writes Abigail Brand in this book. So... everyone should pick this book up because it's going to be a lot of fun, because it's not exactly an X-Men book, but it's very much an X-Men book. That's the only way I can describe it. So yeah, I guess let's take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to be talking about comic book cliffhangers that were never addressed or series that just never finished. So we're going to be just digging into a bunch of stuff and kind of complaining, but also talking about, what books we'd like to see picked up, or if there's potential for these books to continue again in some light. So we'll be back in just a second. For our show this week, we are talking about cliffhangers for comics that were never addressed or series that were never finished. Myself, Kara, and Nick, we have a lot of things to say. I know that's not grammatically correct, but this is speech. So I guess before we get started, I think Nick, myself, we've got a bunch of ideas. Kara told us before we started recording, she just wanted to rant about DC. So I'm really curious as to what that means. But I think that the thing here that we want to talk about today is, the kind of sadness that we feel as comic book readers when a series that we really like or a book that maybe we come to late is we find out didn't come to a natural conclusion or wasn't even ended or wasn't even rushed to finish. I do have one example where something was kind of rushed to finish, but I'll explain why that's on this list. But there are a lot of books out there that I think that are really, really good and have a lot of potential. And they just kind of abruptly end for reasons that are, numerous. There are tons of reasons why a book will come to an end like that. So I guess just to jump right into it, I do want to talk about a book that I think we read as part of some book club at some point. All the days in book club blend together. But I read this book called Flavor by Joseph Keating and Wook Jin Clark, which is, quote, within a strange walled city, an unlicensed chef discovers a mystery that threatens to end it all, which I'm guessing the city and the world. And I really like this book, but it just kind of ends. It's a 6-issue book, and Image keeps marketing it as like a graphic novel, but it clearly has like an ending that's like, find out next week what happens after this big cliffhanger. And then just try to pivot. The book just ends, and I'm so heartbroken because I was super sad to know that there wasn't any more of this story behind the six issues. And it definitely seems like one of those books that was canceled versus a book that kind of came to a rushed end, where sometimes you'll see like a series that goes, oh, we didn't do well in the first 3 issues. And so they try to wrap the book up really quickly, even if it feels kind of forced. At least we get to an ending. But yeah, Flavor was one of those books. It just literally just abruptly ends at the end of the volume. And I'm so mad that people and like lists online, people must not have read this fucking book. They keep recommending it. It's like, oh, this is a really good OGN. And I'm like, no, it fucking isn't. You all have lied to me. So this is kind of where I'm at with this. Go ahead, Kara.
You have jogged my memory for a comic series that I felt similar about. Do you guys remember From Under Mountains?
Yeah.
From like from like 4 years ago. Claire Gibson, Marion Churchland, and Sloan Long. And I remember reading this book, getting so into the world building and like all the different hints they were dropping to like craft a story that was supposed to go on, I think, way more than 6 issues. And then 6 issues was all they got. They got like 1 complete trade. And that was all she wrote. So like that is definitely a series that comes to mind as, why wouldn't it be more? But this is, I'm not going to get into how the comic industry is set up so that you have to find your readers within the first issue. But
But no, I think this is one of those books that I think was picked as like a Goodreads book of the month at some point. And I remember reading it and just feeling like, oh, it just ends. Like there's no ending. The book just kind of abruptly stops, and it's a super bummer.
From Under Mountains.
Yeah. What about you, Nick? What's one of your books? I mean, we'll kind of jump around here, but then we can ask some bigger questions once we get some of these things off our chests.
Sure. I mean, just to touch on what the two of you were saying earlier, it's so funny when these publishers just try to pivot a book into OGN, and they're like, oh, it's such a good self-contained OGN, and I'm like, look, on the last single issue I own, it says Series X will return in 20 whatever, 20XX. Now it's a Mega Man game. Sorry, that's a deep cut. So yeah, it's just wild. It's like literally I have proof that this was not your intent. You just went and pivoted it. Whatever.
But it would be nice if they took those books and then gave the creators like a chance to write a little follow-up ending before they packaged it as an OGN. or like a graphic or like a collected edition, that would at least be something, but we don't ever see that.
And I think a lot of the reasons that I think the reason in some ways that we have this episode topic to work with is just not to make this big picture, but if you want to talk about like modern trends and expectations for media, I think these days there's a real, and I think the internet and internet fan bases are to thank for this, for better and for worse, is that if you don't let things get natural closure anymore, or you don't let things have a sense of finality, or you have a final season, or you have a standalone movie that follows it, you're going to have to come to terms with that fan base that, due to the internet, is now super vocal and won't leave you alone, right? I think the "and with the E" Netflix fan base is still out there trying to make things happen, to say the least.
You won't know until you try.
Yeah, absolutely. That and the
there will be a Firefly reboot. No.
Yeah. But in that vein, I think what's really weird now is I almost wish sometimes that some of my books they would be like, you know what, it got canceled, it ended, because I feel like these days there are just so many books where your book just ends up in a weird limbo state. Like, I would almost prefer just say my book is canceled and it got canceled at a weird point and we're never going to know what happens. Just do that so I can have closure, because especially with Image books, and like, I get it, creators are busy. Image lets you come back to a book if and when you can. That works out just fine. Just books end up in this state. And if you're lucky, the creators on the book will maybe come on Twitter and be like, hey, I'm really busy with Project X. Artist is really busy with Project Y. We're hoping to maybe return to this within the next 2 or 2.5 years. You get some perspective and you feel a little bit better about it. But sometimes, like, Dying in the Dead for me would definitely be, I know I bring up this book a lot, but for me, it's not even like, is this the best Hickman book that we never really got to end? Or is this the best independent original creation Hickman book? For me, it might be the best Hickman book, period. And I know that's saying a lot, because
that's bias, Nick. You have to admit you're biased right now. You love Ryan Bodenheim. Just get over it. Okay?
I was getting there, Mike. I was getting there. Like, I really love Ryan Bodenheim. I think his art is absolutely fantastic. Michael Garland does some really great art. And for me, it's it rides the line with Hickman of being interesting and creative and involving history and conspiracies without well and truly falling off the rails and getting really wild like some of his stuff does. And
sure.
Who knows what's going to happen with this book. They put out 3 issues in 2015. They put out 3 issues in 2017. We haven't seen anything since. And with Hickman, there's a chance he might return to this at some point. But again, it's no different than a lot of these other, at least with Image, that there's maybe a chance that they'll return to a book, versus like some of these other independent publishers where you're like, I have no idea if we're ever going to get volume number 2. So
yeah.
I feel like I approached this topic assignment very differently from the two of you, because when I first saw cliffhangers and unresolved stuff, I did default to thinking about Marvel and DC, and I was like, but that's serialized universes. The books will never end. The characters will keep having stories. So like, I was thinking of unresolved things or cliffhangers in terms of like those vast universes, because even if a book is canceled, you're still going to see those characters in another book. It might take a decade or 2, but they'll come back. Gotta mind those IPs.
They will go back to the well. Yes.
Grant Morrison will always find a way to involve some D-list character.
Like Grant Morrison dredging up the D-list. Yeah.
So so thinking of it in terms of the comics that, the majority of American comic book readers do read, of these big two superhero comics, like you will continue to see these characters in different formats. And I always like the C-list or D-list characters more than the A-list characters, because those are the characters that actually get character development, because heaven forbid we mess with the IP. And so when I was saying before we started this show, like, I really just want to yell about DC, you guys, it's because I have a very specific and particular grievance with DC, because this was kind of like the first time that I really grasped that fans are generally collectively way more involved and motivated to know like character arcs and character canon than perhaps sometimes the publishers are. Like, I know there's somebody at Marvel and somebody at DC who are like in charge of
the
making sure the timelines are not too wonky and stuff like that, but they're human. They're not perfect. Stuff gets by. And I think for these like less important quote unquote characters, it's easier to just be like, well, that story was like 20 years ago. Nobody's going to remember that. But we do. We have the internet. It doesn't forget. So,
well, especially with the internet nowadays. Yeah.
Right. So I think my most like, this, like, it's unresolved to me is still, I'm so sorry for how niche this is about to get, but
please,
you may recall that my relationship problems with DC started around Final Crisis, where I was just like, go jump off a cliff. Why am I buying any of this? But where it really started was in Countdown to Final Crisis, which was a weekly series that was like, there was another crisis. And at this point, there had been a crisis happening at DC for like 2 years. And I was the sap who was buying all of the books because I wanted to know everything. And then they rebooted everything with New 52 and I gave up. But during Countdown, there was this whole subplot. We need to go further back. I love Wally West, The Flash, so much, specifically the Justice League animated version. Like, some girls get crushes on pop stars in high school. My crush was Wally West in Justice League. So getting into comics for me involved some like digging around in the Flash stuff and having very firm opinions about how much Barry Allen sucks, and like learning about Flash's rogues gallery of all these villains, which most of the Flash's villains are like Lost Boys. Like, they're the guys that never, like, they fight, they steal stuff and
jump
like,
out of mirrors.
Right, but in general, their crimes tend to be like more goofy and petty and just like they just don't want to follow the rules of society. And this is not to excuse their criminal behavior, but they're much less evil than Batman's villains, right, and much less.
I'm going to steal the minute hand off of every clock in the city.
Yeah, I mean, given their power sets, they're not exactly equipped for massive, heinous things. Yes.
Right. So the rogues are interesting because over time, the different Flashes interacted with the rogues in different ways. Like, Barry Allen was definitely the cop. He was like, you're a bad guy and you're going to jail. And Wally was much more likely to be like, hey man, are you okay? Like, can I get you a coffee? Like, do you need help? Let me get you some rehab. And so like some of the rogues actually rehabilitated when Wally was the Flash because he was much more compassionate in his crime fighting approach. And then of course everything got crazy and the rogues actually like killed a Kid Flash and like things were really dark again. But for a while things were on sort of a trajectory where you were like, okay, they've got kind of like a back and forth going, but like no one ever really gets hurt until all of a sudden people did. So this Kid Flash died and two of the rogues, Pied Piper and Trickster, were on the run. And this was happening kind of during Countdown. So like Flash and some other heroes were trying to find these two rogues who actually didn't do anything. It was like the other rogues who had killed this Kid Flash. It was this whole thing. So Trickster and Pied Piper were on the run together. And in the most fanfic tropey of fanfic tropiness, they got handcuffed together and they couldn't unlock the handcuffs. And Piper is canonly gay. So a lot of this book was Trickster making some really just did not age well jokes about how, like, Piper was gay and, like, don't come near me and don't touch me, which of course lit up a certain corner of the internet that I found very quickly that was like, oh, they're gay, they're handcuffed together, they're gonna fall in love, this is the trope. So and so, like,
bad tropes, but yes.
So I kept buying Countdown every week because, like, Piper and Trickster were having good chemistry together, and yes, Trickster was being a slightly homophobic asshole, but as they got, like, closer and closer to the end of Countdown, I was like, oh shit, maybe they're actually gonna do this. And then they're, like, in a train car together, like, continuing their, like, running away from the authorities thing, and Trickster, like, turns to Piper and he just makes this terrible joke about how Piper's turned him hobosexual, which is just bad on multiple levels. But it was basically him saying, I'm gay for you. And then they look like they're about to, like, freak out and resolve their tension. And fucking Deadshot, like, comes through the top of the train and, like, shoots Trickster in the head. Now, that
Yikes.
is enough, like, that's kill your gays right there. But part that, again, like, makes me mad and makes me feel like it's an unresolved cliffhanger, which again was, I guess, slightly wiped clean when DC rebooted the universe like a year later anyways. But the corner of the internet that was like, oh, they're gonna fall in love, like, was digging really deep into Trickster and Piper character backstory. Like, I knew everything about these characters from this corner of the internet, and a crucial thing that makes this whole thing nonsensical that you guys are going to laugh at is that Trickster has actually been to hell before and escaped hell by outwitting Satan. So he should not have remained dead because canonly he's gotten out of that shit before. So like,
all right.
So Trickster dying and not coming back and resolving his relationship tension with Piper, and maybe, like, having them both be happy because they were both the more reformed of the rogues.
Sure.
And, like, Trickster should have come back from hell. So there's so much fan fiction about how he gets out of hell second time. Because why the fuck would you have that be canon and then ignore it for one of your biggest plot points of one of your biggest series of the year? And that's why I'm mad at DC.
Understandable. This is that's insane. All right, that is a genuine unresolved, like, cliffhanger thing. I totally understand that.
10 years ago, I'm still furious.
I yeah, you know, and I just want to shout out, Danny mentioned while you were on your soapbox here that he misses Talon as a character. Speaking of DC characters that just kind of disappeared. But yeah, that's bizarre, especially with this idea that, you know, DC wipes the slate clean, and then they wipe the slate clean later, right? Why not bring these characters back? You can rewrite them. You can do whatever the fuck you want, DC, and you decide not to do that. And maybe, you know, that's not on the top of people's list.
But it sounds like you're saying Jeff Johns makes mistakes, and you're going to have to stop this.
Okay, but but the thing with wiping the slate clean is that, and I get it, and again, that has precedent, and they did that before, but I feel like the last time DC had, quote-unquote, wiped the slate clean in Crisis on Infinite Earths in the 80s, they didn't really wipe the slate clean. They kind of merged all the timelines together, which was different. Yeah. But the recent slate wiping, I get why they did it. It's the same thing with Star Wars, where you're just like, this is too messy, we need a fresh start. I understand that. It's a lot to deal with, but it also means you sever that connection that longtime readers had been building up with these characters and understanding their backstory. Like, now you're starting at zero, and now you're starting with, why do I care about this character if all of this backstory no longer matters? So yeah, Piper and Trickster are back, but they're not the Piper and Trickster that were handcuffed together for months on the lam together, you know?
Right. But I mean, with the way that DC, like, and again, this is limited knowledge, but the way that DC seems to, like, cram their timelines together and say all this happened, you know, they could also just, like, with a one panel description to say, oh, remember that time we were handcuffed together, and, like, then you've reestablished that all existed, and then you can continue the character arc. But I don't know, maybe that's too bold for DC to do. because
so,
it's DC.
But I'm sure this kind of thing, maybe not as extreme or as emotional as this, but in Marvel and Valiant, to name your flagship universes, like where just things happen, and sometimes like the characters, even if their specific book drops off, the characters might recur in other books, but then sometimes you think, wait, what about that other thing that happened? Does that not count anymore? So, like, that to me is a weird side effect of the serialized nature of these connected universes, where, you can sort of expect a certain level of carryover, and knowing that your knowledge might take you to different parts. Like, sometimes you just, stuff and you're like, but that thing that you did that time, does that still not count? Like, I guess a simple version of this is just, those gray area characters that are like, they're bad guys, but now they're reformed, but now they're bad again. And you're just like,
Yeah, I mean, this is the majority of One Piece we're describing right now. But I joke because, like, I think this is where a lot of comic book discourse happens online, where people will say, "Oh, so and so wrote this character, and they're not being true to how this character, acted 20 years ago when they did this thing, and that's all canon and blah blah blah." And I mean, even though Marvel had their big wipe and start from scratch, but it wasn't a wipe and start from scratch, because everything happened but nothing did unless it's necessary for the story. But I think that's how the big two kind of operates. They do tend to cherry pick character histories, especially if they have a really 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 long history, or they have to do something in the story that says, I no longer identify as being a person who does X. Like, they have to make a big bold statement. If Batman started killing people, there'd be a whole character transformation. I mean, they're not going to do that with Batman, but you understand what I mean. When if that's going to happen in a story, they usually make a huge moment out of that happening for a character.
I know, because I remember the 5 years that DC couldn't shut up about Wonder Woman snapping Max Lord's neck. Like, that was definitely do not forget that one.
This is something like we've talked about. We literally talked about this the other day, like on the Discord, about Wonder Woman, where her origins have drastically changed because of that one run that Azzarello did, or Brian Azzarello did, where she's no longer this character grown from clay. Instead, she's the child of Zeus, which eliminates a lot of her uniqueness and identity, which is kind of shitty. And then writers have come in and tried to undo that, but then other writers come in and they double down on it, and it really kind of. And we're not talking about cliffhangers anymore, but I think that we're talking about the way that, especially with the big two or with big shared universe things, that there is an issue with how continuity is measured and kept throughout these long serialized stories, which can result in things just getting completely dropped off and missed, or characters just disappearing, even if they were fan favorites, right? Like someone like Hope Summers, right, is a character in the X-Men. Was a huge thing. She was like the pinnacle of everything, because she was the first mutant born after House of M happened. She was this character that had the ability, or she's this character that has the ability to like unlock other mutant powers in people if they have them, or if they're latent. She can like make sure that you get them, or she can amplify them. And then suddenly, I don't remember what happened. Like, there was this series Generation Hope that came out, and then that was like the last we saw of her, because I think they hinted way too much at her just being like another Phoenix character, which kind of dampened the entire character. But now she's just kind of in the background, and we don't really get to see her as being this Messiah-like character that she was touted as for like 2 or 3 years. So I don't know. I understand
that
the sentiment.
Definitely sounds unresolved. So yeah, I guess like my point with the cliffhangers in these bigger shared universes is that you could argue that the whole thing is just a series of cliffhangers at the end of every issue, because it's a universe. So the story never ends unless it's like a specific mini series like Mr. Miracle. And even that's part of the bigger canon. It was just removed enough where you could read it as a one shot, or you could read it in the greater context of the universe, which again just still moves on, because life is not a narrative.
Right. But I mean, to kind of jump back to like what I think Nick and I focused on here, that idea of cliffhangers where books just kind of end is kind of, I think it's even more impactful when it comes to books that don't have storylines that are going to continue, right? Like if Mr. Miracle ends at 12 issues, it's not like Mr. Miracle's never going to come back as a character. But when you're looking at something like what I have in my list, like Bitch Planet, like that book just isn't coming out anymore, and it didn't get resolved. Like I read the last 2 issues today to make sure that like, oh, did the book end and I just forgot about it? No, it ends on like a up next this story, and it's like, yeah, we wanted more of this book. I mean, for those of you who haven't heard of Bitch Planet, the synopsis is basically, women who do not behave in this dystopian future society that doesn't seem too far off from today are labeled as non-compliant in this huge patriarchal society, and they are then sent off to prison if they cannot reform. And this book follows some of the women who did not comply, and so they get this big brand on them, or this tattoo that says NC non-compliant, which was a huge movement for a couple of years, if you guys remember. For those of you who have been around reading comic books for the past 6 or 7 years, like this book started in 2014, and I remember it being such a huge impact. Like when I moved from Michigan to New York, everybody that I knew at Comixology was talking about this book, and I know plenty of people that have gotten NC tattoos on them. I'm pretty sure Tia has a non-compliant tattoo because that book was so impactful, and it's a bummer that it's kind of just fell off. Like 2017 was the last issue of the series that came out. They did this triple feature kind of like in-universe miniseries, but that was kind of the end of it in 2017, and the story is not resolved. And I kind of understand why, right? Like Kelly Sue DeConnick, I think, and Valentine DeLandro, they were likely feeling a lot of pressure on this book because you have to tell it right. Because the fine line that this book rides is so thin that if you do it wrong, it feels like it's a slap in the face to like women and LGBTQ community. And I feel like it's a very tough book to write because it is a satire, but also very meaningful. But yeah, that book not being out has been a huge bummer because there is so much more that you would like to see explored. And I think given the past couple of years, especially with what's happening in the world with Black Americans and people of color in general, like around the world, this book feels super important because that story wasn't just talking about like the feminism and how women are treated. It's talking specifically in a lot of stories about how women of color are treated throughout the book. And it's like, it's one of those books. It's like, we want it to come back. We want it to come out every month, but I understand the hesitancy because it's a very tough book to write. My guess from the perspective of Kelly Sue DeConnick, who is a white woman, trying to make sure that these stories about not just women, but also people of color is told well and intelligently without being offensive. But yeah, I still miss this book.
It was a great book. That was almost my first tattoo. Like I still don't have any tattoos, but for a while I was like, that NC tattoo, that feels like a thing.
Yeah. I mean, and what a statement something like that says, I remember that being such a big movement, and that book was full of essays and stuff. It's such a powerful series. So powerful. But it's not like, I mean, to kind of go back to what Nick was saying before, it's one of those books that was at Image, and it's not that it was canceled. It's not that it was ended. It's just that the creators likely had other things come up, or this is just a really hard book to write, so we don't have any more issues of it. It's just unfortunate, It just falls into that side of things that's just like, we want more. I think a lot of any reader out there who read this book would want more. And I think the trades, the collected editions of this, like sold like gangbusters. But it's got to be tough to kind of put this book out, especially given the climate that we're in. That's got to be a pretty high pressure.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to lighten things up a little bit with a little one-liner. Speaking of things that are unresolved that still like frustrate me at the back of my brain. Once upon a time in the 1970s, Batman fell in love with a ghost lady and was so in love with her that he cried about it, and they never spoke about it again.
What?
Maybe that was like Gentleman Ghost's wife or something.
No, it was this. So the first like superhero comics that I read was this Batman from the 30s to the 70s hardcover collection that my dad had, and one of the last stories in that collection was this story about Batman. Like he was at this like gothic castle, and there was kind of like this undead dude situation, but that's not the part. I don't remember like the plot. I just remember that there was like this beautiful dead lady ghost, and Batman, like by the end of the story, his eyes were like full of tears and he's like, could this be love? And the story ends and they never talk about it again. I'm like, what about that time Batman fell in love with a ghost?
God, that sounds like a Mike Mignola one shot is what that sounds like to me.
Yeah.
I would not be surprised if he had read it. And it was like thinking about it, like the version I read was black and white. So definite Hellboy vibes pre-Hellboy, but I sometimes reflect on that issue. I'm like, man, what happened to Batman's ghost lover? Like,
oh man, jeez.
Yeah. Nick, what about you? Did you have any other books that you were thinking about for this episode?
Yeah, I mean, like Nowhere Men would be a great one for me. Like, if we want to talk about just this weird, wacky schedule that goes on with Image books, right? Like, here's a book from Eric Stevenson, who, at least at the time, was in charge of Image. I think Eric Stevenson is still in charge of Image.
He's the publisher, yeah.
Which would make sense as to why he can do what he wants to do and doesn't have to do what he doesn't want to do. So this book came out... the first arc came out from 2012 to 2013, written by Stevenson, drawn by Eric Bellegarde, who was replaced on pencils for arc 2 by David Taylor, Jordi Belair. It was up for, I think, 4 Eisners the first year. I think Belair, if I recall correctly, Belair actually won for colors on this book. So it was a big deal. Mm-hmm. And so that was Arc 1, 2012-2013. Arc 2 finally released its first issue in 2016. And they released the subsequent issues in the following months. Each arc is 6 issues. We still don't have issue 12. The last issue of Arc 2 came out in 2016. We still don't have issue 12.
Oh my God.
Finish the series 4 years later. And you know what's interesting, and this kind of gets at something Mike brought up with the prompt, which was not only like what books either have an artificially imposed cliffhanger where it just got cut short, or what books end up with like a narrative cliffhanger that's never been resolved, but also just what sort of books have you yourself kind of never finished. And for me, I finished the first arc of Nowhere Men. I got on board a little late, and I saw all of the weird screwiness that was going on leading into Arc 2, and I was like, I'm not even going to start Arc 2, because I know if I start Arc 2, more of this stuff is going to happen, and I'm going to get really upset. And looking back on that several years later and realizing that Arc 2 hasn't even finished, I'm very glad that I didn't start it, because I think emotionally I would be very upset looking at it now. And it's just, I don't know. As I've said, I'm sort of, Natalie Imbruglia torn on this, because it's easy to look at this and go, this isn't fair. Like, I am the customer. I'm always right. Give me my book. Like, don't you want to make money? Don't you want my money? Like, are you really that busy? Like, I know you're probably watching HBO on demand right now or something. Make my book.
It's the American way.
Yeah, exactly. So it's easy to kind of fall into that from time to time, but also it's like, we don't know what's going on with these people. You have to assume if it's something they wanted to do, or they had the time to do, or that they were interested in doing, or that they didn't have something better to do, that maybe they would be doing it. And so I think the only thing I would say is, and I've seen this be the case with more recent books, creator transparency with what's going on doesn't hurt. Just a little transparency doesn't hurt. You don't need to like go into, basically giving me your full breakdown of your day-to-day life so I can find 15-minute windows where you should be working on my book. Yeah. Like, you don't need to do that. Sure. But if you can just be like, you know what, the artist is tied up with a big contract for DC, and obviously there's a good amount of money to be made there, and we won't go back into this until so-and-so finishes up. That's great. I mean, this is kind of what happened with Black Magic, is eventually Rucka came forward and was like, guess what? Nicola Scott is completely tied up on Wonder Woman, if I remember this correctly. And
I think it was a combination of like Rucka was having like a lot of personal issues just with the 2016 election.
Oh, that's what happened with Lazarus. Absolutely. Yeah.
Lazarus and Black. I think all of his books were kind of affected by that. And then of course, Nicola Scott was like, yeah, so she's going to go do Wonder Woman.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
which
good
like,
for her.
We understand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
And that's just it. Like with these Image books, it just gets so weird of like, is my book dead? Will it ever come back? What's going on? So just a little transparency doesn't hurt, because I know like there are still people out there who are like, they got volume 1 of an Image book in like 2012 or something, and they're still like, what's going on? Like they're still holding out hope. And it's simultaneously so funny and so sad.
This is like Sex Criminals was like that, had that same issue where like that book came out, and it was, I remember, everyone I think who's read it has loved it. And, it started in like 2014, 2013. I can't
it's
remember.
Been around for a while.
And like the reason why is because like those
too successful.
Yeah, it started in 2013, right? And then it released continuously until like 2015. And then it took a break for a year. Or for a couple of months, and then they took another break for like a year, and then they took another break, and it was just like, and I can't blame Matt Fraction, Chip Zdarsky. I mean, Zdarsky, I think between the last break that they had and the end of the series, moved on and did so much Marvel work that he was getting praised constantly. So like, can't blame him for taking his time on that book because he's working a lot. And Fraction is doing his own stuff.
You shouldn't have given him as many compliments as you did, people. That was. I hope you take away the right message. If you would have scorned his Marvel work accordingly, then no, I'm just kidding.
But that being said, like there was definitely like a transparency there that I think Fraction was putting out in his newsletter, and as well as the back of the Sex Criminals book, to say like, hey, here's why things are taking forever. Like he was very open and honest about some of the issues that he was having with his own mental health.
Well, weren't Fraction and DeConnick also tied up in that media creation company of theirs?
Yes. There's also that. They were also working on a bunch of other stuff that was not just comics work, which, you know what? People got to make money. They got to work, and they want to be creative in different ways. And I totally respect that. But again, that transparency to me as a reader feels like, oh, well, like I can't just be mad because this book isn't coming out anymore. That's some very good reasons, and I want to respect that. So I don't know.
Can I super, super quickly interject with a fast and fun anecdote about Chip Zdarsky?
Only if it's also furious, but please go on.
It must be fast and furious.
So it was when like the first volume of Sex Criminals had come out. So like one of my friends and I went to TCAF. It was the first and only time I've been to TCAF, and I would love to go back because it's a delightful, manageable, small convention that takes place in the Toronto Library. And Chip Zdarsky was there doing sketches and signing stuff, and he was signing people's like Sex Criminals books, and he had like a stack of like fancy hardcover versions of it. And I just remember so vividly the person before us in line was like getting their hardcover book signed, and Chip Zdarsky he had a whiteout pen with him because in the book signings he was making it look like somebody had come all over the inner pages.
Oh my god.
And I'm like, he's too famous for that now, but that was delightful.
I don't know if he's too famous for that now. I mean, that sounds like something he might still be up for.
Oh man,
if you bring your own whiteout pen, who knows?
Yeah. Well, I guess with that all being said, we probably should wrap up here. I think we've probably got a couple more. Nick, I know you've got some other ones. If you just want to drop their names really quick of books that you're bummed about them not ending well or something, go for that really quick.
Yeah, Danny in the chat is saying Bedlam. Who knows what's going to happen with Bedlam? Who knows? Wasn't there like a whole... Not to fall down that rabbit hole, but I think there was a creator spat, which is why Rossmo left, and then there were other issues, and who knows?
Yeah.
So that's that. I definitely get where you're coming from with that, Danny. Roche Limit. Is that how you say that? Roche Limit? Roche Limit?
Sure.
I think it's Roche Limit.
I think you're right.
Mike, I think you read this book before me. This was an Image series. Michael Morecci. I'm just going to butcher all the names today. Maybe that's right. Who knows? And Vic Malhotra did this in starting at September 2014. We got the first arc. We got 2 more follow-up arcs in the subsequent following 2 years. I really liked this book. It did get really weird. Tonally, it really felt more like Alien than a lot of other even Alien books that I've read. Mm-hmm. I think as you got towards the second arc and really towards the third arc, I don't know if you read the third arc, which I think was called like Monadic. Mike, yeah. I don't know if you read that one.
I did not read that one.
Okay, like it really went off the rails and was like creation of the universe, sort of crazy stuff. But honestly, and maybe there was some finality there, but if I could get more of that, and maybe it got reined in a little, like I would love that. But I don't know. Obviously Morici is he still might be. He was getting a good amount of DC work for a while, so he's
been doing a lot of work with Vault, actually, I think recently.
Oh, okay.
Comics, yeah.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken. I think he had like 2 books over there for a little bit.
Got to get that Vault clout.
Yeah, man. Everyone who's cool is working over a Vault comic, man.
It really feels like it's like
he had
if you truly want to be what's happening now, you're at Vault.
Yeah, he's working on The Plot, which is an ongoing, I think, and Wasted Space was his big one.
Okay. But yeah, no, wouldn't mind more of that.
Yeah, well, I wanted to just plug really quick Time Paradox Ghostwriter, which is the most ridiculous book in the world that ended abruptly because, books get canceled. I just want more of that book. But anyways, let's wrap this episode up here. I want to thank everybody on Discord for being fantastic and hanging out with us while we recorded the show. And thanks to Nick and Kara, who you can follow on Twitter just like the rest of us. You can follow Nick at Death Star Plans. You can follow Kara at Kara S. Sam. You can follow me at Mike Rappin, and you can follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at IRCB Podcast, where we try to post pretty regularly. I got all this new merch. It's probably going to get posted on both of those platforms pretty soon.
This show and our many subscriber-only episodes are powered by fans like you on Patreon. Join now at patreon.com/IRCB podcast. And if you haven't already, please rate and review our show 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts.
We would also love it if you would join us on our Discord channel, which is at ircbpodcast.com/Discord. And make sure to tell a friend or 2 about the show, please.
Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music. They are wonderful people. Xander is a very cool guy. He also edits the show. That's all I got to say. He's just a cool guy. I want to say again, thank you to Kara and Nick for being on the episode. Thank you to everyone on Discord who is listening live. And thank you to everyone out there who subscribes and shares the show. We had some reviews that I meant to get to this episode, but we're running long, so maybe I'll get to them next week. If you've written a review for the show, I plan on reading them out, I promise. So if you haven't written one, get on that before next week so I'll read it live on the show. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.